Welcome to the third week of our course From Media Computation to Data Science. Remember last week where we found out that digitalization is all about representing the building blocks of media as numbers? You might also remember me saying that once they are numbers, we can basically do anything. Last week was all about enumerating those numbers. We showed you multiple loops, like the forever, repeat, for, and the for each loop. This week, we'll explore a totally different way to apply functions to datasets. Rather than starting with theory, we want to dive right into the first project. But don't worry, we'll explain everything throughout this week. In our first project, we want to create a Cipher language. It's a language that you still might be able to understand, but we want to experiment a little bit with text. As you remember, you can find blocks to operate on texts in the operators category. Right here at the bottom, we find the split block. What our Cipher language should be is it splits all the text that we add as an input here into letters. Then it will search for the vowels. If our letter is a vowel, it's going to be replaced with the vowel, then the letter B and the vowel. So I would be I, B, and then I again. If it's not a vowel, we will just keep the letter that we had before. So we start with splitting our text into letters. As you remember, you can write a text here as an input into the split block. I'd go with, let's do I love Snap. And I want to split that text by letter. So again, you remember, when I click on that block, I get a list with all the letters of my text. In this case, it's 12 letters because it also contains the spaces. Now we want to find out whether a letter is a vowel or not. For that, we will make a reference list that contains all the vowels. You can create a list in the variables category by taking the list block. Small trick, when you press Shift while increasing the number of elements of the list, you get 3 elements at once. So we have A, E, I, O, and U. To find out whether something is a vowel or not, we will now try to find out if it's part of that list. For that, we can use the contains block. So for example, I use the list that I have here as the first input to the contains block, and I can try to find out whether something is part of that first list. So for example, let's try the letter J, and then it should report false because J is not a vowel and not part of that list. Works. Let's try it with a vowel now, for example O. Now it should report true because O is part of that list as it is a vowel. Perfect. We can now use that to compare it with all the letters that we got from our list. For that, we can use a block, which is my absolutely favorite block in Snap. It's the map block. You can find the map block also with all the other list blocks in the variables category in the red list blocks. When you look at the map block, you see that it has 2 input slots. One you already know, that's a list input slot, so I can use a list as an input here. Great that I already have a list, it's my text. So I can use that as an input to the second input slot. The first input slot, as you can see, is a ring. You might have heard about rings if you watched Jens's last video, and you will also learn about them in the next video. What I can tell you right now is that the rings take a function as an input, so you can add any function in here, any reporter, so any block that reports back a value. The reporter that we want to use now should compare things, and it should react differently whether a condition is true or not. You might know that construct, it's if. In this case, we want to use the reporter if from the control category. This block reports a value based on a condition that is evaluated here in the hexagonal slot. So we already have defined that condition. It's whether our letter that we get from that list is part of that list. We can use that here, and I will leave that input slot open. Now we need to define what should happen. So for a vowel, as I mentioned, we want to report back the vowel, then the letter B, then the vowel again. For that we need the join block. So we want to report the vowel, then the letter B, and then the vowel again. Let's try that. Does it work like that? No, okay, we need to try it in the map block. Else we want to report the letter that we had. The cool thing about map is, and Jens will explain that in the next video as well, you can use these, or you can leave these input slots open, and for each element of that list, it will fill that element into all of the empty input slots here, and then it will do whatever this function requires it to do, or whatever this function wants to report. So in this case, when you remember we have that list, the first letter of that list is, or the first element of that list is I. So the first time I is filled into all these input slots, I is part of that list, so it should jump into that part. Then it should report back I, B, and I. Else, for example, for the second letter or the third letter, which is L, it should report just the letter who was filled into that empty input slot. Let's try that. Awesome. We got a list with the letters as we expected it to be. So all the vowels have the B and the vowel again. All the non-vowels have just the letter. Now we need to put that back together. We already know how to do that. We can use the join block for that. If you drag a list over the arrowheads at the right side of the join block, you see that a red ring is appearing. This red highlight is indicating that you can also add an input list here. If I leave that block now and let it be the input of that join block, you see that the title text of the block changed to join input list. If I click on that block now, I get my text back as a text, not as a list. We can also let our sprite say that, so we can read that a little better. So let's use say, and here the result is I buy là-bas Phoebe snap app. That's, as I mentioned, not a real Cipher language, but it's, at least you can have fun with languages. Another way, or another fun language that people use in other countries, because that's a pretty, that's a thing that German kids do in school. We did some research and found out that Finnish kids, for example, use the I language. So whenever you have a vowel, you just replace that one with an I. And you can create that other language by just removing the join part and entering an I into the input slot here, because whenever we have a vowel, we want to report back an I. Let's try that. This would be I love snap in the I language. As last step, I want to create a block for that. So we already have our whole function here, and we can create a block to hide all that different blocks here. You remember, to create a block, you can just click on the plus sign in each category, and you can then select the category. I'm going with operators, and you can decide what kind of block it should be. I want it to be a reporter, as it's reporting back values. I want the block to be called, let's do translate text into Cipher language. Okay, text is going to be an input. Here we can already find our block. If I click apply, I also have the input slot. In the input slot, I can copy my I love snap thing. Now we can use that as an input here. And we have to change one more thing. We don't want always I love snap, but we want whatever text we enter as an input here. So I will just drag down that text here and click apply. Let's check if we get the same thing. Awesome, works. Let's try it with something else. For example, my name. So it's Yadgar in real. and it would be Yitgi in the I language. This was quite cool, right? Just a few reporters, no loops, no local state. All the iteration is abstracted away. This is what we call functional programming, and it's what this week is about. And again, don't panic. If you didn't get that at the first time, we will explain everything again throughout this week. See you in the next videos.